Hello, I'm Justin Wheeler, and welcome to this episode of Nonstop Nonprofit. Listeners, today I met my match. Today's podcast guest is someone so invested in nonprofits, so into impact, so devoted to the sector, that we barely scrape the surface of the topics on our agenda. Jarrett Ransom, aka the Nonprofit Nerd, is the founder and CEO of Nonprofit Coaches, the Rayvan Group, and co-host of the Nonprofit Show. And today, Nonstop Nonprofit is bringing the show to her. I go into every podcast prepared with an agenda, points to hit, and questions to ask. But Jarrett blew my agenda out of the water with compelling arguments, perspective shifts, and just straight up data. It's clear that she's on the cutting edge of nonprofit trends, and she's used to these types of trailblazing topics. Subjects on deck today: identifying our biggest challengers, using history to inform the future, women in philanthropy, corporate competition, and buzzword alert, nonprofit sustainability, capacity building, and infrastructure. Oh, and our kids, of course. This is going to be fast, furious, and full of unicorn moments, so buckle in and listen as Jarrett and I nerd out about the good, the bad, and the future of the nonprofit sphere. Let's dive in. It is your number one priority to ensure that your business can continue to deliver on its mission, whether it's this year, next year, and beyond.
I'm always so baffled when I do webinars. There's always somebody at the end who raises their hand and says, I'm the development director. Should I have access to the budget? I'm always like, yes, you've got to know that.
The best thing that we can do is just raise as much money as possible and then give it to the people around the world.
If you're going to be sustainable, you have to have a multi-channel strategy to reach all of these different generations of donors however they want to be reached.
The best thing you can ever do as a nonprofit leader is spend as much money as possible on your story.
And it snowballs like any peer-to-peer campaign. The more people that view this content, the further and further it grows.
Then you're doing it wrong.
Okay.
That is unacceptable, and that is not the way to run a board.
The more nonprofits can give their donor base that experience of the impact that's being made on the ground level, there's nothing else that you have to give someone. This is Nonstop Nonprofit. Jarrett, welcome to the Nonstop Nonprofit podcast. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm really good. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. As we kind of jump into the podcast today, before we dive too far in, I'd love if you could just tell us about yourself and how you got involved in the nonprofit industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say I got involved by default.
Okay.
So I really was raised by very generous parents, and my mom in particular had my brother and I both really engaged in our community. We grew up in a small town outside of Columbia, South Carolina, and we were just really committed to our community as well as our community members. So, we were baking cookies and wrapping presents and making donations and, of in-kind gifts in particular. And then, we were doing like litter cleanups and pickups as a kid. And I just truly loved that. I loved the spirit of engagement. I loved the spirit of civic connection. And that really planted the seed of, my nonprofit lifestyle, but really just evolved me as a global citizen. And so by default, but I really got into fundraising. And here's the best part there is I did the breast cancer 3-day walk with my mom. So after years of selling Girl Scout cookies, knocking on doors for cheerleading and soccer camps and you name it, then I really moved into professional fundraising and I loved it. And so I was like, I think there's a career to be had here. So that's what got me into fundraising. And it's been a really fun journey.
That's awesome. And so much so that you're referred to as the nonprofit nerd. So unpack that for us. Why are you the nonprofit nerd?
Well, let me grab my props, right? So my undergrad is mass communication and theater. So yes, there's a bit of thespian in me, but my nonprofit nerd glasses. And the reason I call myself that is truly because I find myself nerding out over this topic until I like to say you're blue in the face, because chances of me turning blue in the face over this topic is very, very rare. And so I love it. I love talking about, how do we build sustainable business models? How do we scale our programs as well as our rock star talent and, the impact of our service? So all of that's just really fun. And it also lends to my personality. So it complements the mug, the rainbow unicorn mug, but it also just complements the fun style that I like to bring to the work that we do, because oftentimes we do very serious work, very, crisis driven kind of reaction work. And I do find that bringing some levity in is a lot of fun. So when it comes to branding and who I am, it's like, hey, yeah, I am Jarrett. I am president and CEO of the Rayvan Group, but I'm also your nonprofit nerd.
So challenge is officially accepted, and I think we need to set up a challenge where we just keep talking about fundraising, and whoever stops loses. Yeah. So I think we're going to have to.
Let's do it. It's like that blinking game, right?
Exactly.
Who's going to blink first?
Exactly. So you also have a more corporate title as a CEO and president of the Rayvan Group, which is all about helping nonprofits build and scale their businesses. So talk to us a little bit about that and what you're doing on that side of the nonprofit stratosphere.
Right. Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. So 2009, I started my fundraising consultancy, and that also was by default. I was impacted by, being a reduction in force. And so I was asked to lay off my team at that time. I was chief development officer of a $21 million operating budget. So laid off my team. I was also in my 20s, and that really impacted me emotionally and just spiritually, of going through the motions of, making these decisions that are very, very impactful of everyone's life. And then 6 months later, I got the hatchet and I was laid off. So I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Right. Gratefully, also, my very generous parents were entrepreneurs. So I have ridden or rode, somebody please correct me, this roller coaster of entrepreneurial life, right, as a young child. So I started the Rayvan Group then. I really started, to be honest, as a grant writer, because that at that time in that economic crisis, grants still needed to be managed. They still needed to be reported. They still needed to be written, just like we experienced most recently during our COVID impact, right? There were so many emergency grants that became available. There were so many foundations and corporate social responsibility departments that started giving away money through grant, avenues. So I started really, namely, I should say, as a grant writer. Over time, my personality was like, you've got to get away from this. So I've pivoted well before the word pivot became cool and now not so cool. Well before Friends, I'm pretty sure, I should be the one getting the royalties. So yeah, so now I do a lot more, coaching. I do executive coaching. I do strategic planning, and that's a year-long, very methodical process with me. And then I also co-host the Nonprofit Show, which is a live daily webcast. And so I like to, as I say, I play well with others. I share toys, right? And I really, really love to be of service in a lot of different avenues. And the other way that I haven't shared yet is I come in during big transitions. So I come in to serve as your interim CEO, CDO, or OO. So Chief Executive Officer, Chief Development Officer, or Chief Operating Officer. And so those, I've moved from hey, let's write grants, let's put food on the table, not only yours, but mine. And then really into what is that I love to do? Where's my genius zone? Where do I feel is my superpower? So yeah.
Well, your superpower seems to also be in raising money. You've raised $86 million. How have you done that?
There is a knack to raising money, and I hope that we'll dive into this because I think we talked about this on a preliminary conversation, but it's really about getting out of your own way when it comes to your own money story, right? And so I coach and teach that practice and method often with my clients, because whether we're whether we are planning a gala, I have found we tend, to really shop with our budget. And we need to shop with the donor budget, the supporter budget. So a lot of the techniques that I use and coach with not only the board of directors, but just the nonprofit leaders in general is really about getting out of our own way. Let's create that big picture. If money wasn't an issue, what would you ask for? If money wasn't an issue, where would we be in 10 years, right? And so really creating that picture, let's visualize it. Let's do a little bit of manifestation, but then let's also find our roadblocks of where are we putting, roadblocks in our way? Like we are often our biggest challenger and competitor. So yeah, there's a lot of that I talk about. Okay, let's just identify what is our opportunity and possibility and where might we be cutting ourselves short. So could be grants, and I'm big on diversifying your revenue streams. Could be grants, could be earned income. It could be individual donors, which, as we know, should be the majority of the pie. But there's so many different ways to bring in revenue. And I preach all the time about diversified revenue streams, but sustainability. So those are a couple of the ways and how I've helped to raise over $86 million. There's a couple of capital campaigns in there too. So those are like, really big hauls and successes. So it's been a lot of fun over the years.
In regards to sustainable revenue for nonprofits, I hear a lot of leaders talk about, the nonprofit market. It's different. You can't build sustainable revenue. You could have obviously a strong recurring donor program, but at the end of the day, we're reliant on donors' generosity. So how do you help organizations become more confident in building sustainable revenue for their organizations?
I hate to say this, but I find all too often that organizations are really falling short when it comes to measuring their previous year's success.
Okay.
So when I come in and I'm like, hey, let's nerd out. Are you ready? Like, get your glasses. Let's do this together. Let's see who turns blue in the face first. It's really about what have you tracked from previous years, right? Let's look at what's been tracked. What are your trending revenue generating areas? Where are you losing money? Where might you be leaving money on the table? What's working for you and how long can we ride that wave? And then also really just identifying, okay, based off of here's what your history tells us. And again, these are numbers. So if you have a really phenomenal CRM, that helps, right? So a client relationship management tool, that really helps. So bringing in these elements of what are the facts and what are the numbers from previous years? Where is it we want to go, which is back to like, hey, if money wasn't an issue. And then how do we gap that, right? How do we gap that? And when I talk about gapping, I also talk about who do we have at our table, let's just consider we're all sitting around the table and talking about, I'll take on this job and that responsibility and this task and so on. So what? So really moving into, do we have the right people? Do we have the right champions? Do we have the right board members? Do we have the right rock star talent? Do we have the right volunteers? And so when it comes to that gap, right, it's really identifying what models have you used. Consistency is usually the other thing that's lacking, right? I find too often organizations, they don't know their numbers and their past history, and they also rarely do anything consistently. So that really helps us to identify, okay, let's now identify where is it we want to go so that we can grow to that next level to see, what is it we need to do next? So there's a couple of tips and techniques, but the way I work with my clients also very customizable, right? Because I want to work with the systems and the tools that they have and that they need for their size and scope, because I think that's also very important.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. And agree, like we get stuck on this idea of, the only way to have predictable revenue is for it to be recurring, which, definitely a good revenue stream to grow and to own. But I love the focus on sort of your historicals and your performance. Like what is our average growth year over year? What could we expect? What can we forecast? Take out the anomalies and, build a strong budget based off of historicals. I think that's a great way to approach, being confident around a sustainable revenue for the organization.
One of the things I did, and I would love to just, drop this in there, is I did really a grant assessment with a client. So what was their grant history? So focused only on grant dollars. Okay. What was their grant history? How many were they submitting? How many were they winning? What was the average ask amount? And what was the average award amount? And truly, we created a strategy, which I wish I had the numbers right in front of me, but it really like doubled their impact. And I'm talking financial impact, because we actually reduced the amount of grants that we submitted. We increased the ask amount, right? And that made all the difference in the world. So our award rate went up, meaning we received more yeses from our applications, our proposals. We were submitting less, but we were receiving, a higher return on investment. So we were reducing some cost when it came to staff time or consultancy time, and really seeing a positive impact by that slight tweak. And that's just one example of, what's been successful.
I love the approach of, there's always different variables or levers that can be pulled to increase efficiency or ROI. When we look at sort of online revenue, specifically revenue being generated from your website, a lot of people think, oh, we just need to spend more money on ads, or we need to acquire more traffic. But if you look at, there's some other variables to look at. The average donation size, how do we increase, the average gift size coming in through a website? Yes, you can increase top of funnel, or you can also just increase your conversion rate by having a better website, better technology, making it more user friendly. So lots of different levers to pull across, revenue channels. And so I haven't really thought about it from the grant perspective before. So I loved that story. Okay, so I want to talk about there's a couple different sort of like subtopics we're going to talk about today, because when you and I spoke, I think it was about a month ago, I walked away from the conversation just very excited to get you on the podcast and to talk about a few different things. And so one of the topics is women in philanthropy. And, when you think about if you take a step back and you think about the nonprofit sector, we know that it has this mandate to create impact, right? To be on the cutting edge of change. But there still seems to be some pretty big gaping problems in the nonprofit industry, specifically as it relates to women in leadership, pay and so forth. And so just like to, from your perspective, if you can talk about what you're seeing, what you've experienced, why is this such an issue still today in an industry that is supposed to be focused on changing the world?
Oh my gosh, as I take a deep breath, right? There's a lot in that statement. So I do believe that the rise in women philanthropy is now. It has been happening, but it is now, right? Like currently, women control more of the financial pie than ever before. We women, typically inherit twice, right? So that's from our parents and then from our partners. We also are giving around 6.3 billion, that's with a B, wow, billion dollars of charity. And that's a number from 19. So women are giving and making, upwards of 6.3 billion. This is collective. And we women make up about 47% of the nation's top wealth holders. And that's really, we are talking about $2 million in assets and above. So that's kind of the threshold that I was pulling the numbers from. And by the way, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, they've got some phenomenal stats when it comes to this, and some of those came from there. So I do want to source and reference Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. So there is a movement happening, right? Like it is in the works. And I really, again, just believe that the rise in women philanthropy is now. Many women are working right alongside their male partner, their male counterpart, maybe when it comes to like these intimate relationships. Whereas before, and I can even look at my parents, right? My mom stayed home. She was the caretaker. I mean, she was the vice president of my dad's business, but she really stayed home. And that was her domain, was homemaker, raise the children, be there for pickups. Thank you, Mom. You took me like many years of soccer and gymnastics and cheerleading. And, we really burned the rubber when it came to the car rides. But so that is happening, right? Like that is happening now. And so we have a lot more increased ability, right, to make these decisions. When you look at our staff, I'm going to say the majority of the nonprofit sector is led, and I don't have that statistic, but led predominantly by females, right? So women identifying as women, or individuals identifying as women. However, I still see, and this is the makeup that I still see, is most of our board members are male. So I'm seeing there's a gap there, right? So the board of directors, this body of governing individuals, are still predominantly male. The staff in particular, I'm still seeing predominantly women. And then I'm also seeing that shift, as I talked about, and so nerdily shared the statistics about the rise in wealth for women. So there's a lot going on there. When we talk about levers, there's a lot of levers being pulled and twisted. It's kind of like that old twist it, pull it, bop it. Like there's just a lot of that happening right now. But I do think it's really cool. And the other thing I know about women is women tend to sprinkle their wealth among various causes and missions, where men tend to go deeper with 1 to maybe even 3 philanthropic causes. So that's kind of shifting our sector and our community at large right now. But, when we talk about gaps, there's huge gaps, right? There's pay gaps that's still happening. And I preach right alongside so many others that we are a workforce, and we are a large workforce, and the nonprofit sector makes up a huge workforce in our nation. But to retain the talent, I really think we need to pay competitive wages. And I'm not talking nonprofit competitive wages, right?
Right.
So having our salary on job descriptions, having that change in our culture is phenomenal, right? Like, let's have an equitable practice that shares, here is a CEO position, or any position, to be honest, and here is the salary range. That helps us close that gap. So there's a lot of best practices that can really be implemented. And I also believe that it comes with a culture of transparency, a culture of communication, that we openly talk about this within our team. So internal team, board team, stakeholder team. So when we do push out any job description, we are sharing that salary range to help close that gap.
So many things to kind of remark on here.
Yeah,
It's so good. So actually, I think it came top of mind with a couple things in regards to the percentage of, or the dollar amount coming to charities from women. I think it's important to note Mackenzie Scott just obviously made a huge contribution to several charities. I think she added a couple more billion to that number. But what I love about her giving strategy is it's unencumbered. It's without strings attached. She gave hundreds of millions of dollars to a few different nonprofits last week where it had not a single restriction tied to it. And I don't know why this is the case, but I feel like, this is going to definitely set the bar high for other philanthropists and funders, because we should trust organizations, to use the funds at the discretion where they think it's going to be most needed. I don't understand why that's such a hard concept to understand. And I love that Mackenzie has made such a strong statement with her giving. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts other philanthropists and so forth.
I love that too. And I'd love to just piggyback on that before we move to the next one. So you said a lot of amazing things. We should trust, right, the organization to do what's right with the donor dollars. I fully agree with that. And when we are able to have that, then we can start, truly investing, as I call the rock star talent, because too often we have designated dollars that are only program specific, right? Or restricted is the other word that's trying to come out. So when we receive dollars and we say it can only go to this designated fund and this program, it's that chicken and the egg. You can't do the program without the people. And, you have to have the people do the programs and vice versa. So that donation by Mackenzie, it really sets the bar, and I think sets the tone, and challenges, both encourages and challenges our philanthropist, right, to really consider how you make a gift and how you can truly trust the organization.
Absolutely. Something else you talked about is just sort of this competitive pay, and not like competitive to nonprofits, but competitive, to for-profits and alike, because we need top talent. We need the smartest and brightest people to be solving the world's hardest problems. I spoke with this leader at a nonprofit. She went through this exercise with her organization where she publicly posted internally to their team everyone's salary and compared it to for-profit in the states and the cities that they lived in, sort of like at a equal level of like, if you were working in the nonprofit space, this is what you would get paid. And she made this for a couple different reasons. One is for pay equity, wanted to ensure that the females on her team were being paid as much as the white men on her team specifically, is what she said. And then secondly, was to show that, hey, like having competitive pay with a for-profit industry is absolutely critical, and we need to get over this, frugal poverty vow sort of mentality as nonprofit leaders. Scarcity, right. Exactly. And so, I think that bringing more attention, awareness to this type of conversation is important. I was talking with an individual yesterday who's been working in a nonprofit all his life and has a family and can't even afford to stay in the nonprofit industry because can't afford to provide for his family. So I think this is an important conversation, an important topic. So in your process and working and coaching with executives, how much does this come up? How much do you have to really encourage organizations to pay more, to focus, or to invest more in overhead? How much work is that on your end?
All the time, right? And I will say the buzzword comes up with capacity building and infrastructure. And those are really the words that are really taking, reign right now. Is let's invest in infrastructure. Let's invest in capacity building. I just helped an organization approve a $75,000 deficit budget. That was intentional. There are two reasons you have a deficit budget. One, holy crap, what has happened that, something's in trouble. Secondly is intentional. And this was by and far an intentional strategic move by the board, right? And so truly, it really was to increase their infrastructure. And so they're bringing on an executive director. They're bringing on an executive to lead the organization to the next level. Now we've educated the governing board. So now how do we take that and educate the stakeholders that invest in a deficit budget, right? So it really is about how do we narrate this? How do we share the narrative impact with, whether it's grants or investors or, major donors. The other thing I love in our community is there are blank check donors, right? There are angel investors. There are blank check donors that will say, whatever you need, you call me. And so this is a great opportunity to say, we are investing in our infrastructure. We are investing in our people. We believe in equitable pay and practices. And it is so important. Right alongside that, and I know I get super excited and I tend to have this huge run-on sentence, but as a board member, right? So what we can do for our nonprofit community is, as a board member, it is incumbent upon you to advocate for proper pay, for competitive wages. It is incumbent of you to advocate for unrestricted dollars, right? And so when people say, well, what can I do? If you are on a review committee and you have the ability to educate the review committee on how you might be able to advise how that money is spent, this is a wonderful opportunity to really help to verbalize that narration of the importance, so that we can see a little bit more, competitive simulation between the for-profit and the nonprofit, because we are running corporations. We are running really large corporations, and we exist to solve the community problem. Right? So if you want to eradicate hunger, if you want to eradicate homelessness, right? You have to invest in the people that are doing just that. And I'll get off my soapbox. I might go down a foot in height, but yeah, it's so important for all of us, not only those that, work in the sector, but serve in the sector.
Totally.
Is so important.
And I think, and what I'm seeing is now more than ever, nonprofits are competing for corporation dollars like never before, or consumer dollars, I should say, like never before, because as businesses and corporations are becoming more conscious of how to, to be a better player in the communities that they're in and so forth, they're starting to tackle big, important social problems. And, they're well suited for it, in all honesty, with the sort of, talent and resources that they have. So I think, nonprofits need to take a long and hard look at sort of the way they prioritize capacity, the way that they prioritize their infrastructure, so that, they're not losing, because they're obviously uniquely positioned to solve the problem, I think, better than a corporation, but they're still inherently going to be this competition for consumer dollars as businesses become a lot more public about their social impact and so forth, which kind of leads me actually to the next kind of topic about time, talent, and resources. Treasure. Thank you. Treasure. Time, talent, treasure. So unpack that for us. What does that mean?
That was a podcast. Vanessa Shaw is her name. She's a business growth strategist, and I've worked with her, but I've also seen her work with so many other amazing entrepreneurs. And so her podcast is, Get Rich Without Being a Bitch. But I came on and I was a guest there to talk about how when women earn, accrue, gain more wealth, oftentimes women are like, embarrassed. We don't want to talk about it. We feel shade thrown at us from other people, in particular our peer, females. And so it's really about like, how do we as women really use our wealth to do more good in our community? And so that is a topic of discussion that I am really immensely devoted to, because I have done my own work of my, childhood shadows and whatever. We could get super woo-woo if we wanted, but about what is my own money story, right? Like, what is my money story? How has that impacted me with my own glass ceiling? And then also how I talk to donors to make investments into the community, in particular, either the organizations I worked with or work with in the consultancy space. So it's really about, how do we use our wealth for good and to be philanthropists? So the one thing I like to do first is like, let's define philanthropy, right? Because so many people think that it really is the $1 million charitable donations that are made. But the definition of philanthropy is goodwill to fellow members of the human race. That's it. It doesn't say a dollar amount. It doesn't say how many zeros you need to put behind a number to be called a philanthropist, right? So going into that, we've got 3 ways of how we can give our philanthropy: time, talent, and treasure. And those 3 T's are really known throughout our sector because we have time, and typically the more earning you make, sometimes you might free up some time, or you've got staff that has time, right? Like there's so many CSR or corporate social responsibility efforts in corporations that say 1 day a month, we want our staff to go volunteer. That's time, right? Talent. Maybe you are an accounting firm and you want to provide pro bono your talent to an organization. And then treasure truly is typically associated with that financial contribution. So that is writing a check or making some kind of a planned gift. So time, talent, and treasure are the 3 T's when it comes to philanthropy.
I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, is it's harder for organizations to create strategies around time and talent because the treasure seems so concrete, right? It's like, we need money in our bank account to do X, Y, and Z. Yeah. And so in your experience in working with organizations specifically around time and talent, how have you helped organizations understand the value, how important actually someone's time or talent could be to the actual mission of the organization?
Great question. And I really think it depends on where the organization is in their life cycle, right? Like we all have a life cycle. So are they startup, are they growth, are they maturity? Like where are they, and where could they best use extra hands on deck when it comes to, time and talent? Because it could be cleaning up a playground, right? Or it could be working in their donor database. And there's so many applicable talent areas where maybe there is, a business development professional that is really good and it's like their jam to work into a CRM system. Let's use that talent into our CRM system and see what works and how we might strategize to be a little bit more efficient. Now, these are a little think outside the box opportunities, which is who I am as the nonprofit nerd. I think outside the box because I love to ideate, right? Like bring me solutions, not challenges, because we are finding solutions. So really it goes to that time and talent, right? Like what is it, going back to the first of the conversation, where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years if money wasn't an issue? And then we want to see truly if we can source what we need through time and talent. If money wasn't an issue, right, what is it you need? And let's source that.
From my own experience, and I spent a lot of time as a fundraiser building a couple different nonprofits, I've seen how talent, being able to really optimize the talent from your supporters or donor base, whoever it might be, actually has a direct impact on your fundraising ability. And as sort of an anecdote, to that point, I remember an individual came into our like info box, right, at an organization called Liberty in North Korea. And he was like, hey, like I'm an engineer. I really care about this cause. And I want to build something if there's a need for it, right? And at the time, we couldn't really think of anything. Like, we didn't have like a checklist of like things we needed for engineers to build. We spent some time overseas and we realized, actually, we could develop an application that would make our programs more efficient, more secure, and more effective. So let's talk to this engineer. Fast forward, talk to him. We built this application, and it went on to also show a lot more transparency around where donor dollars were going as they were deployed to the field to fund our programs overseas. And that's an example of like being able to use talent as an opportunity, as a gateway to raising more funds, because it could open up a lot more opportunities and doors for you as an organization. But it does, to your point, it does take time and focus to really think through, where are we trying to go in 3 to 5 years, and how does this align to that, to those goals and to the vision.
And who do we need, right? Like who do we need to play with us to help us go and grow? And that is a great story. I love that story. It's exactly perfect.
Yeah. So as we kind of transition here, another question I'm excited to ask you about, and we talked about this a little bit on our call, and it's about sort of the future generation. And I'm particularly interested, and as it relates to philanthropy, I'm particularly interested in this. And this couldn't have been more timely. Just last night, like I was putting my oldest son to sleep, and he's 9 years old. And I noticed on his desk he had 3 jars. One said savings, one said spending, and one said giving. And he knows where all the different organizations were involved in and so forth, but we didn't prompt him to set this up. And so, it reminded me of a conversation we had on our call about just like the future generation of philanthropists. And so I know you have also a similar story. Would love to hear you share your story and kind of talk a little bit about how we can, as leaders, invest in this next generation.
I think our sons would really get along. So I'm going to say 11 because just here in a few days, he will be turning 11. And I am so very grateful for the ability to share my work of, what I do in my community. And again, as a global citizen. So it's not just here in the Metro Phoenix area, it is everywhere throughout the world. And there's been several opportunities where I've had the great pleasure and privilege to take my son with me, sometimes out of, just sheer, oh my gosh, I don't know what else to do with you right now. So you're coming with me, kid. Single mom, right? And so he's been by my side a long time. There's so many stories in which, I truly could share. And just like my mom planted the seed in me of giving my time to my community as a young child, right? I really feel it's so important to plant these seeds of philanthropy to our children, whether you birth them, raise them or not. Like it is, again, incumbent upon us as citizens upon this earth to demonstrate philanthropy to our younger generation. So again, I don't care if, it is your DNA or not, but really about demonstrating time, talent, and treasure and how our younger generation can truly be a part of that and create their own plan. And we have seen so much impact happen through multiple generations of giving, right? I think, not to be political, but the Obama campaign did a great job at like $5 helps, like it doesn't have to be 500, but like $5, $2. So really showing that impact. So one of the stories I like to share is I went to a charity gala that was family friendly. And I wish we had more of these because I am so tired of the black tie dinners and the cocktails and all of the booze flowing. And like, I have to get a sitter or a nanny or someone, right, to take care of my son. Like, I want to bring him with me. So this event in particular, it was a boxing foundation and they provide after school boxing to underserved, underprivileged, at-risk youth. And so I took my son with me to this. I set a budget for our family, which is family of 2. And I said, here's our budget. So if it comes a time in the night and you feel compelled to share all sum of this budget, this is up to you, right? So I gave him the bid card. Let's just call this our bid card, right? And it had the big number on it as I fold my paper, So it's like, let's say here's our number on it. And so he was sitting there with me actually on my lap, and the auctioneer started, and, he turned around to me, and again, he's sitting on my lap. Like we were super close. There's people all around us. And he's like, Mom, is now when we use our budget? And I'm like, you got it. And so, the auctioneer was going and going. And then finally he turned around and he's like, now? And I was like, dude, totally up to you. Like, this is yours, buddy. Whenever you feel the need, like it's within this budget. And I said, but I want you to know you're not going to camp, right? Like this isn't an opportunity for you to send yourself to camp, because I didn't want him to get, misconstrued. And I was like, see these kids in the ring, because they actually had some of the children there. And I said, you're giving an opportunity for one of these kids or a kid like them to attend after school camp. And sure enough, he raised his bid page or bid paddle, whatever you want to call it. And it was phenomenal to see the movement of literally just from his lap up in the air with his bid sheet, and from the people, right? Like I was like, no, I'm not the donor. He's the donor. And that's been super cool. And we have many occasions and opportunities like that. Another time, I won't get into it, but another time we were at the checkout, right? And so many places now will say, would you like to increase your amount to support X, Y, and Z? And he always gets to answer that question. So there's so many ways to do that. Awesome. And I really think it's our responsibility to demonstrate philanthropy to all of our children.
Absolutely. And I think the other, added benefit is oftentimes kids can be a great conduit to, bigger giving through their parents. Right. And when I was on the founding team of an organization called Invisible Children, and we were mapping out sort of like an ideal donor profile, like who is the best type of donor for us. And we came to the conclusion that it was a 15-year-old kid, because we knew that one, we could inspire them around our mission, that they would care, and that they, had tremendous amount of time to actually raise funds. But secondly, when their parents, would see them get involved and start caring about something that was much bigger than themselves, it obviously ignites the parents, and the parents want to support that type of engagement. And so I think oftentimes, we overlook these small dollar donors, but there's usually an opportunity for more as well, just as a way for the parent to support, the kid. So I can't believe that we're already at 42 minutes. This has been such a fun conversation. I want to make sure
and neither of us are blue yet.
Neither. I could keep going. I really could keep going.
Another 52.
We'll have to do that. We'll have to. But I want to make sure that our listeners can find you. So what's the best way for our listeners to connect with you outside of the podcast?
Of course. Yeah, thank you. So again, I co-host as well the Nonprofit Show, which we've had you guys on there. So grateful. thenonprofitshow.com. My personal website is therayvangroup.com, THERAYVAN group.com. And then the easiest to connect to all of that is Instagram, and it's Nonprofit Nerd. So nonprofit_nerd. You'll find me there. And yeah, I love to get nerdy.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jarrett, for your time and for the great conversation. I really appreciate it. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Nonstop Nonprofit. This podcast is brought to you by your friends at Funraise, nonprofit fundraising software built by nonprofit people. If you'd like to continue the conversation, find me on LinkedIn or text me at 562-242-8160. And don't forget to get your next episode the second it hits the internets. Go to nonstopnonprofitpodcast.com and sign up for email notifications today. See you next time.